New edition of D&D coming in 2024? Well, let's see what the playtest packet tells us. Hello there, Ungainly Titan here again. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. It has been a long while, but I have recently been toying with the idea of new content on YouTube, particularly Dungeons & Dragons related content, and the announcement of one D&D has prompted me to come back on YouTube. So on August the 18th, 2022, for people watching in the future, Wizards of the Coast announced a whole bunch of things on that date, but one of them was the new playtest, an Unearthed Arcana for Character Origins for 1D&D, and 1D&D is a revision of the core rulebooks to be published in 2024. 2024, of course, is significant since it's the 50th anniversary of the original publication of the original D&D material by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, the 3-volume booklet that kicked off the whole D&D phenomenon. The playtest content revealed on D&D Beyond on August the 18th contains everything one needs to create a new character, bar an actual character class information. You can use it with the current character class information. That's probably how they intend us to playtest it. And it is largely compatible, I think, with the current baseline power levels of 5th edition, which addresses in part, I think, the question about is this a new edition of Dungeons & Dragons. Now, this has been long anticipated that 2024 would see a new edition of Dungeons & Dragons. Some people thought it would be a complete new edition, and others thought it would be completely backwards compatible with the existing rule set. The frequently asked questions on D&D Beyond claims backwards compatibility, but limits backwards compatibility to supplements and adventures released for 5th edition for D&D so far. So the Curse of Strahd is given as an example. The playtest material actually as given is not actually compatible, in my opinion, with the core rulebook as it stands, because some of the stuff in the rules glossary is a contradiction of similar rules in the core rulebook. The rules glossary at the end of the playtest packet redefines game terms that are used in the packet. Some of these game terms are existing game terms in the 2014 Player's Handbook, and some are terms that were not defined there. The existing terms, some of them, are modified in various ways. Now, a lot of this is fairly minor, but it does invalidate those rules in the existing Player's Handbook. And there are two big changes. That is the D20 Test and the Inspiration rules. Now, the D20 Test rules cover all the D20 dice rolls, ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws, and the Inspiration is a reworking of a system that was in the 2014 rules, and a lot of people tended to forget about it. The D20 Test. The term the D20 Test now encompasses the main D20 dice rolls of the game. That would be ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws. Anything that now refers to a D20 test affects all 3 of those dice rolls, and they've brought in a number of changes to the D20 tests. The first is that 1 is now a failure. If you roll a 1, it automatically fails the test. If you roll a 20, it automatically succeeds on the test. This, they claim, was a widespread house rule adopted widely among the player base, and they're basically following the player base here by incorporating it into the official rule set. Critical Role would be a table that I know of that ran on the 1 of failure, 20 success on all tests. But it will bring in playstyle issues for tables that have not adopted this house rule up to now. For instance, some people might want a check to be a degree of success, so they mightn't want failure to really be a thing, but they want a die roll on an ability check anyway. An example that I would think would be certain kinds of tool use in non-pressure or non-high pressure situations. So, for instance, somebody's a blacksmith and they're trying to shoe horses for the party for whatever reason. In story, you don't really want to fail on shoe horses. A blacksmith isn't going to fail to shoe a horse, but they might take longer than average to shoe a particular horse. So time might be a consideration. Do you want to know, is it going to do it this afternoon, or is it going to take this afternoon and tomorrow? That sort of thing. Now, you can still probably do that or adapt that. The others would be people who had players roll D20 checks, particularly ability checks, in cases where they had no possibility of success, to hide in-game information from the player that in fact said that they couldn't possibly succeed in this particular activity. that is also going to be a playstyle issue that's going to have to be addressed by those particular DMs. The other change to the D20 roll is that critical hits from attack rolls have changed. Now, instead of all dice rolled on a critical hit doubling, only the weapon dice will double. So only attacks that have a weapon dice damage or unarmed strikes that have a weapon die damage will be affected by this, and only those die will double. So other things that attack that are not weapons, for instance spells, will not double on a critical. They've also spoke about in the associated video material that they're talking about taking away criticals from monsters. So monsters will not roll critical dice. They will be replaced ultimately by a rechargeable ability that does similar kinds of damage that you would expect from a critical, but is more under the DM control. Inspiration is one of the other things that have been changed. So the existing inspiration rules were intended as a reward for role-playing your background, particularly the personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws. The problem with it was that DMs like myself tended to forget to give inspiration, and players tended to forget if they got it to use it. And a lot of people forgot about the personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws. Now, they seem to be dropping the personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws, which I think is a bit of a pity. I thought it was no harm to have it in. They're making inspiration somewhat more mechanical. You get inspiration points now if you get a 20 on a D20 test, but the DM still has the ability to reward inspiration for something particularly outstanding. If you gain inspiration and you already have it, you can pass it on to somebody else. If you do not use your inspiration before you have a long rest, before you start a long rest, you will lose it. So that should encourage more use. Backgrounds have a new dispensation under the new rule set, and they've a considerable number of changes to the backgrounds. First big change to the background features are, of course, the ability scores have now been moved into the background. They've been taken away from race, where they were generally predetermined, into floating ability score increases that can be applied as part of your background. Skill proficiencies as before, tool proficiencies kind of as before, and feats are a completely new thing. How this is going to affect the existing game, I really don't know, but you choose a feat at first level, and feats have a variety of characteristics, including level gating, prerequisites, and some other things that didn't previously exist in feats, and the example feats given including reworking of existing feats. Tool packages in particular have been standardized in prices so that 50 gold pieces gets everyone onto an equal footing. And you choose a language from your background as well as a separate language as part of your character creation. And I don't really know why they just didn't put both languages into the background. The new races, or at least the races presented in the new playtest material, or the recent playtest material, this is probably going to be the core races for the 2024 Player's Handbook. And there are some additions. We have the Ardlings that are new. We have the Orc, and noticeably absent, we have no half races, no half elves, no half orcs. The Orc is essentially replacing the half orc, and for the most part, I don't have any problem with the races as presented, but I do at the same time. I think that they are less than what they could have been, and there are errors made that the Wizards could have done a lot better. I think it's a little lazy. So some races have sub-lineages, so there's no sub-races as such anymore, and sub-races have been removed quite a lot, like dwarves and halflings and gnomes. Well, gnomes kind of still have them. Ardlings, I don't like the name as well. Dragonborn, I don't like what they've done with the Dragonborn. I think it's a step backwards from what they had in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, even if they have gotten rid of the sub-race as such. But I actually thought that the traits in Fizban's were much more flavoursome and much better represented Dragonborn than what's currently on offer. The typical racial stat block is, I'm going to show you the dwarf one, but they're all of them kind of similarly. I'll show you the elf one as well because it's the other typical type of racial stat block. So you generally have a line as a blah, whatever, you have these special traits. And above that line you have these traits. Most of the creatures are medium. Some, like humans, can be medium and small. Some, like gnomes and halflings, are small. Everybody moves at 30 feet. There's no 25-foot speed race in this playtest material at any rate. Then you have racial traits, and you have a list of racial traits which is fixed and variable. It differs from different races, and the number of them differs from different races. I don't really have a problem with the number of differing, but I do have a problem with the fixed nature of it. I think some of these traits should be optional pick from a list, particularly stuff that's cultural. Forge-wise is, in my opinion, clearly a cultural trait. There's no particular reason that it should be innate to dwarves. I know the lore dwarves kind of support them to being artisans, but there's no particular reason why every dwarf should be an artisan. I know that this thing about the divine creator making them like this, but that kind of reeks of a long-standing problem within Dungeons and Dragons, which is bioessentialism. Bioessentialism is ascribing to as innate features of a race or a species characteristics which are more likely to be cultural. They could easily have given other options for Forge-wise out of the history of the game. For instance, another option might have been heavy armor proficiency. And I think they should have done that with at least one characteristic for every race, because if they did that, the races wouldn't be... First of all, I think it would be better. It would allow world building in that DMs could create their own cultural traits, and it would allow the publication of cultural traits specific to D&D worlds, so that your Forgotten Realms dwarves could be significantly different in cultural terms and in some of their traits from your Greyhawk dwarves or your Dragonlance dwarves. This is a missed opportunity here. And also, if you had optional traits, say if you had a fixed number of optional traits, 1 or 2 per race, then you could create a better half-race rules. The half-race rules as they stand, I think, are really bad. They are, if you say we're a half-dwarf, half-human, you would pick either the dwarven racial traits or the human racial traits. One or the other. I think there should be some way of picking elements from both. Just saying. The other aspect of racial traits that I don't like are the way they've done lineages. This is the elven lineages, but all the lineages have been done in a similar way. That is, you get a cantrip at first level, you get a spell at 3rd level and another spell at 5th level. I think it's lazy design, and I think there should be a little bit more variety, and they should be work away from spells and more towards powers. This is what they've done with the elves. Now, I do like the fact that they have little ribbon features like the increased dark vision for drow, or the swapping of cantrips for high elves, or the increased speed for the wood elves. But I think those extras should be up across the whole list. There should be something at 3rd and something at 5th, other than just spells. I think the spells overly favour casters, and they don't give enough to non-casters. I'd probably be okay with it if the elves had it, and the Ardlings and the Tieflings were different, but the fact that everybody is done in a similar way, I think that is another missed opportunity. The survey on all of this playtest packet is up for 2 weeks, from the 1st of September until the 15th. My final thoughts on the playtest packet are mixed. There are some things that I find okay. In fact, most things in it individually I don't have a problem with the exception of the hybrid race rules. But there are certain things that I just think represent a missed opportunity. So I would like to see better hybrid race rules. I think the hybrid race rules as they stand are just really bad. I think there should be a way of picking a trait from both ancestor races. So if you're a half dwarf, half orc, for instance, I would have no problem with that creature having, say, the dwarven stone cutting trait and the orc's powerful build. But I wouldn't necessarily want to see a free pick from either ancestor, because that might allow unexpected synergies, shall we say, that you didn't want from a play balance perspective. But I would like some mechanic in place to be able to choose something from both. I also think there's a huge missed opportunity by not separating out cultural traits from the regular innate traits, but I've already spoken about that, so I won't add any more. I do like the existing background system. I think it works, it's sufficiently close to the current background system that there's no problem with existing material, with the exception of feats. On the other hand, I think they might just ignore the feats that have been issued already, so that all the existing feats might just simply drop out of the system, because feats were an optional feature of 5th edition. Even if they were widely used, they were optional. They were not part of the core 5th edition rule set. So they might just replace feats with the new feats, and it looks like the new feats are going to be core. Because the feat lists as given, I didn't go through the individual feats, but they did cover feats that were already in existence in the core rulebooks. What that's going to do for ability score increases in the classes, I don't know. Maybe ability score increases are going to remain, and they're going to remain part of the class progression, separate from the character progression. It looks like feats now are going to be part of the character progression. And I actually had a quick look at the Strixhaven character building rules, and yes, the Strixhaven feats are actually character based. So if you were a Strixhaven character with a Strixhaven background, you got a feat at the start at 1st level as part of the background, and you got another one at 4th. And it's character level, not class level. I think the existing class and subclass power structure will probably remain the same or very similar. They might change the class structures, but they won't change them, I think, too radically, because if they do, the existing subclasses won't work. And if the supplementary material is supposed to be usable with the new core rulebooks, then I don't think the class structure is going to change in a dramatic way. I think the levels at which various powers come online is going to fit around the subclass structure more or less the way it does at the moment. Now, those individual powers may change. For instance, they may change how the assassination ability for assassination rogues works to compensate for the loss of doubling on a critical. So it might no longer be an auto crit, it might just be you roll double your sneak attack damage. I don't know how that's going to go into the future, but so far it looks like it is compatible with the existing rulebooks. The main reason that they're dropping the player's handbook and the core rulebooks out of the compatibility equation is because they are rewriting some of the core rules, like they've done with the D20 test and the inspiration, and with feats. Overall, that's pretty much what I've got to say about the playtest packet. Feel free to comment, ask questions about any individual traits or feats or powers that you want to discuss in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe or ring the bell for notifications. For people who are coming back to this channel wondering what I'm doing now that I'm putting up videos again, I just want to say that it is unlikely that I will go back to doing gameplay videos like World of Tanks or any kind of gameplay videos. I might do video review games or game review stuff, but the future planned content is going to be around the playtest for the 2024 revision of the Dungeons & Dragons rulebooks, and after that we'll see. So thank you for watching, and I'll catch you again on the next one.